the length of discussions and things that we need to get through for the rest of the afternoon, we're going to come back to the priority discussion at the end of the session. And we're just going to move on with a couple of other things, but we will come back to it, we promise. So just bear with us and we'll have a look at a couple of other votes that we've got to go through. So I hope everybody's had their lunch and had something to drink because we've still got quite a few things to get through. So Michael is going to keep us moving here with the next item, which I believe is the dot status.
So yeah, we're just going to keep working through wage 1 and 2. We'll see how far we get in this session. We do want to try and get to obligations today. So I think it's pretty much a given. We'll need the session afternoon tea. So as we're going at the moment, that's pretty much a given. Carry over. Very good thing. All right. Up ahead. Okay. Pleasure, Fred. Yeah,
That's better. Welcome back to the technical difficulties design group.
All right. Like Stuart said, we at the end of wave 1 and 2 will kind of have an open discussion about anything else we needed. So if there's anything out of that priority discussion we had before the break, have a think about it as we keep going through this session. We can come back around to it. So the next one, good one, status.
Use full screen.
Oh, yep. All right, task status, the current status of the task. So at the fire spec 1-to-1, it needs to be of the task status value set and is required. So that's what we're going to work with for this. And this is the bus state machine that defines those status at the moment from draft right through to completed failed. So I think the next slide is actually the definition of each of those in the value set. So one of the things we're looking at here is for our use cases for R1, do we support all of these status? Do we only support a subset? So there's a required binding, so we can't add to it, but we can constrain it. So we can say that these ones aren't relevant for our use case and take them out, but we can't add to it. So this is where we need to work through whether we leave it open and we'll use any of these or we do both. So these are the definitions that are part of that value set. The draft being that the task is not yet ready to be actioned upon. I think that's potentially a contender that we would pull out, given that we're not interested in how the process leading up to the creation of the service request or the task, that it is ready to be actioned. So that's one we may look at. Requested, the task is ready to be actioned upon, action is sought, received, the form has claimed ownership, the task. Accepted, performer has agreed to execute the task but not yet started work. Rejected, the performer who claimed ownership of the task has declined not to execute it prior to performing any action. Ready, task is ready to be performed, no action has been taken. That's got some additional that's used in place of requested, received, accepted, rejected, and request assignment. So that might be in the context of directed request. Cancelled, not completed. Progress, when started but not complete. On hold, when started but work paused. Failed, task was attempted to be complete. Completed, completed, and entered in error. Another one potentially, when the task should never have existed and is retained only because of the possibility of may have been. So, looking back to these are the relationships between the states that the tasks move through. So I've pretty much opened the floor. Anyone here online who has any interest in constraining this, taking ones out that I don't think are relevant. Any cases for that?
I know there is a constraint on the proposal.
Yeah, there is, but I'd probably open it up first. Anyone?
Dan?
Just wondering how we would handle the scenario where the laboratory needed more information.
I'm just going to spitball it, but it could be on hold and you're out of channel, asked for more information, but that assumes you've already accepted it. So you're asking for more information before you accept it?
I think the question is the tasks that, status reading, another property that goes with status. So you can say, you can set your task to rejected and you can give a status reason of blah, blah, blah. Like we're rejecting this task because whatever you like to say. Yeah.
And that we are going to talk
solution, but that's there.
We are going to talk about those in the next slides. If we need to, we can jump ahead and look at those and then come back to this. But do you think that would be useful? And
Not that helps. Thanks.
so this is the status reason and the business status. So status reason is an explanation as to why the task is held, failed, refused, etc. And then the business status contains business-specific nuances of the business status. So they're things that we can use to supplement the status, as Angus said.
So it's not a great solution for what I think Dan is proposing. Like, you get a request and you go, we'd like to know more about their hepatitis status for this request. Not really great for that. We have really used this for the technical rejection. So we reject the task and say, we got the good patient rep. Like if it's a technical fail, you're not using it in the sense of like, we please give us more supporting clinical information. It could, but it's not a great workflow back and forth to give more information. But I guess this state machine is really about that. You requested, received, accepted. But between received and accepted and rejected, it's kind of this opportunity where you can go, I'm looking at your stuff and I'm going to not do it because I'm rejecting for this reason. Or, yes, I've looked at it and now I am going to do it and accept it. So, I know what the state machine is there for, but status reason probably the only element where you're providing context why that goes into putting into this other status.
Well, you can use this that like the fixed statuses are in progress, for instance, isn't really creating a transparency window necessarily into something which might be quite complex. So you could add greater granularity of statuses, which is, for example, they get in spec to kind of cover off, for instance, the staging of a fulfillment through radiology, where you can say patient's now gone to be scanned, the radiologist is writing the report, upon copy. You put all of that into the unconstrained business status. It could, in theory, overlap with on hold. There's no reason why you couldn't do in progress and simply update the business status to say, you should know I'm actually asking you for some additional information. Even though it's still in progress, you haven't given it up. Yeah, I don't know whether that is R1 me, to be honest, but I think some of these are definitely not practical, in my opinion. So I don't think it's useful to have ready to skip over the other one. I think we'd better take a pretty standard way through, which is requested, which is your initial state. And then at that point, you either go through received accepted or straight to accepted if you want. The rejected is something you do prior to beginning work. So we could say, normally if you think of radiology, the request is for a MRI that you receive. You mark the fulfillment as I've received the fulfillment request, but then you reject it because you don't have an MRI machine.
I think so. Again, for our use cases, we've got directed requests and undirected requests. And I think the requested accepted still works with that flow. You've requested it, you specified who you've requested to do it, but they still need to accept it. Or it can be requested with no one identified to fulfill it and someone accepts it. So
You still need receipt.
sorry, yeah, and there's received as well.
So
If you've directed, so received just because directed, then
No.
no?
well, yes, yeah, no, sorry, yes, you're right. Received, but potentially directed. There's also the question about what do you do in transfer? So if you're creating a new task for a transferred fulfillment, then in order to claim the request as a filler, you could argue you just go straight to accepted, because if you claim it, then you're basically saying, I'm willing to do it.
We've treated like in progress with no return, right? So collective for pathology. Once we collect successful, then we go to in progress, which you now can't reject. Like you've sort of gone to the point of no return, let's fail. So for us, we actually go look for tasks that are requested, and we set them to receive. We don't even go to accept it, right? We just receive it, right? We're not saying whether we can do it, but then as soon as the patient arrives and we collect the blood, we go straight from receive to progress. So that's just up.
Which is invalid.
Is that invalid? Why is that invalid?
It transfers.
Can I not skip the status? It's going in the right direction?
We can certainly, because they've explicitly made it possible to skip receive.
So I skip accepted, really. I go from receive to progress.
You can't progress through the workflow skipping acceptance.
Why not?
There's no error.
You can temporarily go through.
I'll temporarily put an accepted and then go
Instantly, yeah.
So I'm not doing that. I can do that right-handed.
So, I mean, the decision we're trying to make at the moment will be around those obligations, around who has to create the task, and all that will happen later. But at the moment, we need to identify whether these status suit our workflow. And I think, as Andy pointed out, that can't see how ready would necessarily work, either a directed or undirected request. And the same potential the draft, right? That the drafting would happen before the request is set up. Or part of the internal process of creating this, but having a draft status in play would mean, what do I do? I just have to ignore it until it changes to request.
Can I just ask a question around objectives? Because it goes straight to that black box. And what happens if you've accepted it and then you've rejected it, but it's accepted by someone else? Go back to people, it looks like, I think from that diagram, it looks like it's been rejected. You can reject it to pick up an error, and then he gets the request.
but that, you can't go from accepted to rejected. You can only, you do a technical receive, so.
I'm not worried about being received. I'm worried about if we reject it, where is that black dot going? It's going straight to the black dot, which means that if someone chooses reject,
It's now
they've
failed,
gone.
and it has to be
I'm saying,
resubmitted.
and I'm saying
Well,
that's a problem.
But the service request still exists.
Yeah.
It's only, so if I, for instance, sign it to Angus and it's you know, some exotic buying to accept anything, but let's just say there is a test that Sonic won't accept. And Angus goes, nah, I'm rejecting that. Then from a practice management system, we would see that the fulfillment has been rejected and could potentially then, if this was an assigned request, assign it to someone else and go, well, let's create another task and go off and ask for.
But if the status of rejected, I can't remember what it said, you know.
It's only rejecting that one fulfillment type. So that's what I said before, that a service request can have multiple tasks associated with it.
The potential performer who claimed ownership of the task decided not to accept it.
And you take that to Sonic.
Yeah.
And we go, oh, we don't do that here.
Yeah.
You take the form, we go to another lab, and you do it, and it's kind of the same thing. It's the service request that exists, there's a task saying, hey, Sonic do this, but then you come to us and we go, we don't do that. You know, so you still got your service request, you just drop that task, go to a new lab, get a new task, and you do this task.
And yeah, I think we have to work through some of these things in obligation and that as well. We're not going to about at this point.
Just kind of going back to the requesting and saying, we can't do that. It's now your responsibility because we're saying we can't do that. You need to decide a new pathway.
So does it cater for the use case where it's like a patient like might be a busy lottery or something like that, and they show up and they've done one and there's another to go or something?
Easy complex stuff, but I think it's a separate part. So these have done still three requests, three tasks, three service requests, or one service request with a current of three, and getting it's weak, but maybe
You treat this like a rule free convention where you've got you got these three samples, so then you do three different fulfillments for that same request. But then we have to worry about ensuring that fulfillment is by the same organization three times, as opposed to like here for this one, there for that one, there for another one, like you could do that.
I just think we can't ignore that use case because alcohol blood lottery is a pretty common thing, you know. But you're not going to have it over 3 days or something.
I think like other things that are complicated, we would kind of see that fulfillment as being a kind of sign off that if it's accepted, whatever complexity of the task that is required, whether it's 10 things needing to be done, one thing needing to be done, this lab has taken responsibility for fulfilling it and magic happens behind the scenes. I think eventually we do want to get up to having more granular kind of control and more granular thing. But as soon as we do that, I think we carve off a whole bunch of obviously more complex workflows.
Yeah.
So we really need to.
I think you might get somewhere where like the task would have an occurrence though, right? It's taken done 3 times. And then you scan the barcode again and you go, oh, it's been done once, and it can be done 3 times. So we'll spin up another task, so now be done twice. Yeah. And so it's a separate task with its own state machine for that second occurrence. Yeah. But I'm just saying like that's a lot of complexity, you know, by which 2 is not 3.
Marvin online.
I probably would agree with the comments made before in terms of what we're doing. We don't use the ready state. We haven't used draft, and currently we've not done on hold, but that's not to say on hold wouldn't be something that we could do. But certainly ready, we don't see a need for, and we will put something straight into requested rather than going through draft.
Does anyone oppose that? Does anyone think there is a case for ready or draft?
I suppose it's like problem, like ready to in that box, right? what's described that much of it a problem? Really?
No,
No, it didn't.
because it implies that you can't then move it to an accepted state, for instance. So the thing with requested is that you typically apply that at initiation of task. So let's assume he's not here, correct? Let's assume then that the placer is creating the task. That was Brett.
Right.
That's not here.
He's not here either.
Online, so careful.
So let's assume the placer creates a task. You would initiate it into a requested state, saying this is ready for use. Let's say it's got an owner. The owner then goes, oh, look, there's a new requested task for me to fulfill. They would then, in theory, move it to a received once they got it, and then potentially progress it through accepted, etc. In the ready, if you see something in a repository in a ready state, what does that mean? And there's less insight into the negotiation of fulfillment, potentially. That's my only problem with it is the more we allow alternative pathways, the more complex the set of alternatives each system is going to have to deal with, because it's just different.
Yeah, I am going to struggle with it because you can't go to reject. Like, so what if I get an order assigned to something to me and you didn't include the patient record? Now I'm like, ready? Like, no, I'm not. Like, there's no way out, is there? Like, and I don't know if that's we're doing the right thing, but we use the rejected status reason as our people get out of jail, right? Like, if you did it wrong, and this is what you did wrong, we're not doing it.
It is correct behaviour, because from a filler's perspective, there's only two kind of alternatives. One is you reject prior to starting work, or you fail after starting work. And those are your two kind of pathways. The question then is, of course, how do you add to those statuses to, if you need to provide further information? So one is status reason. You have a long narrative description of, what happened, or you could go down the business status route and kind of bifurcate the fixed states into substates.
Can I just ask, do you guys handle that request for more information? Or it all
The way to do it would be some kind of smart on fire kind of callback, so that you can reach back to a known endpoint and say, give me a list of current medications, give me a list of current procedures, and that stuff would be covered hopefully what you needed.
As far as this state machine goes, if you're proposing to use in progress, business reason or on hold.
I don't actually mind. I don't really care about it on the whole. I'm happy if everyone wanted to support that. I don't know whether it is a bridge, kind of just more than we need at the moment, but
I think for me,
That ready, like on hold failed, like we don't do that, but I'm not against having that ability. So so it does seem like the old man out here. Ready literally means can't go rejected, where the others are just other.
You can go to cancel, cancel.
That's what cancel is the reason why. Yeah.
to me, on the whole, is waiting for something, right?
Yeah.
There is
Waiting
there is
for
a,
more information.
that's right. Whereas in progress, it's just processing it somewhere in that process. Whereas on hold, I'm explicitly waiting for something to happen, right? Whether I've asked for more information or I need something to complete it, so that it's distinction that we're not doing anything at the moment because we're waiting for something.
Interesting, we haven't used cancel as per there, have we? Like we've kind of treated like cancel what the requester can do and rejected what the filler can do.
you end
The
up,
line allows the filler to.
Yeah, you can cancel your own time.
you end up in contention though. It gets a lot more complex if you're allowing multiple actors to change states at different times, on the same resource. Yes, you can kind of ensure that the copy that you're trying to update is not, you haven't had an intermediate update. You can kind of get around that, but you can pretty well define an independent role for cancelled, failed, and rejected, so that you don't step on each other's toes.
Question.
is the cancelled state relate, like, think that box that's around all of those states in the middle. If that cancelled state, you could go from ready to cancel. Is that what that box means? I just noticed. Sorry.
That's a really good point, but there is an arrow from the white box.
Yeah.
Cancel.
Yeah.
So there's nothing to stop the dealer at any point saying,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's just a task.
Don't forget this is not implying that these state changes are only created by the filler. Like if the party that's moving the state has not been defined yet.
Yeah.
So
But the cancel, you typically kind of expect that to come from the placer saying we no longer need this facility.
well, not according to depends how you read the spec. The spec doesn't necessarily prohibit it, but I think it's hard to see why a pillar would need a state other than failed and rejected. It's either, there's the only differentiation really between those two uses is this prior to in progress, or is this in progress and after? And that's the equivalent of their, we're stopping this, and then providing some reason.
Essentially, we abandon. We could.
Yeah, whereas on the other side, the placer goes, I don't want you doing this anymore. Of course, there is constraints, and whether it'd be nice to be able to build this in, to say things like the placer shouldn't be able to cancel once it's already in progress, because that doesn't really work. You can't put the blood back in.
You don't want to go for a model where you have to cancel the service request. It's the placer do this and then resubmit it and someone else can.
No, you don't.
Something that is in progress that's being put on hold and still be cancelled.
No, I can't go back.
Well, yes, and no, it can't be cancelled from a, well, we haven't decided that.
On hold status.
What's that?
And be cancelled from the on hold status.
Why not? Diagram to the
The work plan doesn't allow that. If you're in hold and you want to stop, you would fail.
Take it off hold and then fail.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can get off hold and then you fail at the same time.
Well, you take it off hold, which means you've got to go back into in progress, and then it in progress is to fail. And then there'll be a reason to say, I ran over the test tube with my golf cart.
point is that it has started, right? You can't cancel it because it has started. No going back. So you can only fail, start as it's done. You can't go back and cancel what has been started.
If you put it on hold before it's technically in progress, and then it comes back, and you have to reject it, how do you do
No,
that?
you can't. You have to accept it and move it in progress before it can go on hold.
On Monopoly, there's only one way around the board.
Yeah.
Or in the preset, you can cancel from on hold.
We're not in the prescription.
No,
It's the same as Angus saying that he goes from requested to in progress. You have to go through accepted even if you only go for a fraction of a second as it goes through.
Well, I would submit a friendly amendment. Oh, we don't have.
We don't have a proposal yet. but we can see if we've got a proposal.
The one I would not support is the one on the left. What was it called?
Ready. All right. What about draft? Let's see if I can.
Fine draft, yeah, there it is, draft.
So draft.
Just a quick question about
Like to say you can't put draft in your own system, it's not going to be interoperable.
Oh, sorry. What happens when you share your screen when you're editing?
peer review to me.
Yeah. Just feedback.
So, can I just ask quickly about entity error?
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't appear in the state machine, so is the assumption that you can always get to
Find the definition.
it's like a reason. Yeah.
Should never have existed, and only because of the possibility it may have been removed.
Yeah, so if you've accepted it and then in progress, it feels weird to do something.
Sounds like put draft.
Yeah.
Put draft and then go on, I thought,
we're going to take that one out then. I have no reason not to,
Or it needs to be in the state machine.
because we don't know how to use it, right? There is no definition.
Have you,
From my experience, entered an error is kind of deleting penalty.
Yeah.
When you don't want to lose the data, but it never exists, you apply delete and you check the stuff. So it's kind of workaround.
yeah,
And I
agree with
can
that.
feed that to the really think it's a, part of it.
Yeah. Every 6 months, you got medico legal.
Yeah, medical legal stuff.
Yeah.
We need to keep it on record.
Also,
It might even have been completely carried through.
Yeah.
But with the wrong patient information or something like that,
Absolutely.
we just go, no, because it never.
Essentially, we're saying then, I think that sounds true. So we're saying that you can transition to the entity error from any of
I
those.
think you need that from medico legal.
Yeah.
But I'm not a medical
But
legal
you
expert.
need an aspect transfer between A and B, right? No, you don't want to send a request to point the attention there. We're going to go like, we want to.
But if you realise it,
Why only when you need to.
Akin to a draft, it looks like a failed draft. But we're knocking, I agree with knock out draft. I think we knocked out for an error as well. Not that they can't use the system. Just don't expect a third party to do it. It's not part of the spec of transferring data from A to B. You from A to B, I think it's an error.
what if you realise, what if you as the dealer realise it's been entered in error and
Reject it.
signal that? Reject it. Okay.
Reject it, that's reject it.
Reject it, say this looks like to.
And that's what they do. Like, if I got one today that had no patient reference for some error,
Yeah.
I'd reject it and go to the patient reference.
All right. So
I could say, oh, is it an error? But
You can always put the entity error as a status reason.
the business person.
cancelled or rejected with into the error.
Yeah.
What happened if we realize that we need to delete the task when like it is in progress?
Reject or cancel.
Only, yeah.
Cancel.
We'll have a need for cancel the task anyway. Or if something is sitting in, say, received or accepted, the place that wants to cancel it, yep, you cancel it. The other reason is if fulfillment has been transferred through patient choice, then you want to cancel the original task, which means it's in a cancelled state now. How do you know it was cancelled? Because it's been transferred, or cancelled because it's no longer needed? In theory, you could say, oh, well, we don't need to differentiate, but it's certainly, I think, helpful for billers to know if there was an alternative provider.
It's pretty rude. That'd be business.
Well, that's where differentiating the two cancelled states could be done through the business status, but you could have another one there, which is cancelled because it was entered in error, for instance.
Marvin, online?
Actually, it'd probably be easier if someone just summarizes the commentary around entered in error, because I couldn't hear most of the people who were talking other than the main people who were speaking. So when you get to that point, then because I'm looking at this state diagram now and I'm thinking cancelled, it's cancelled because it was entered in error, for example. So it looks to be more of a reason code than a state, but I'm open on that.
I think that was the conclusion that the room was coming to. Exactly that. I think you just summarised. Right. I'll make an on the fly edit. Let me know if you get it wrong. Given that discussion, I'd make a proposal that, this is already in the spec, cardinality 1-to-1, it's already bound task status required. So we're not making that decision, we're just noting that that is the case. So I'd like to propose that it is must support, and the codes that we would include are requested, received, accepted, rejected, cancelled, in progress, on hold, failed, and completed. So those ones with strike throughs will not use.
Here at second. Yeah, Michael.
Make any comment here about the state defence? And the status is not more the state defence.
Oh,
Right.
yeah, but that's obligate. That's way 4. So this is proposal 7. So I'll put the QR code up again if anyone's lost there. Oh, sorry, I'm up there.
All right, I think most people are pretty happy with that. So 32 in the affirmative, 0 negative, and 2 abstaining for proposal 7, which is dot status.
Now, had a good lead into this. Good. The other one to go with status is status reason and explanation for why this task is held, failed, etc. And then business status contains business specific nuances of the business state. I'd be interested if anyone can describe the difference between these two, and maybe one over the other.
On the whole,
Yeah,
request for more information.
The difference between status reason and business.
yeah,
Very different. So status reason is absolutely tied to that state machine and those statuses we just talked about. 100%. This business status is another status, arbitrary status on the side that runs in parallel. And it's really where we can start, wish, to put real domain specific status, like collected or in lab or arrived or image acquisition. And they kind of work in parallel to that state machine. The state machine is dictated by fire and you must orchestrate in this state machine. But when it says like in progress, we can have a business status that fits with that might say collected or in lab, they're independent. So business status is where we get to make real Australian workflow if you want about what are the statuses that make sense in pathology, and they're probably different from the ones that make sense in radiology. And it's free for us to make up whatever we like in those statuses. The status reason is really your developer's state machine that a task must transition through. And the status reason here is that it is in the failed status because
Context, right?
provide me something.
Marvin, online, sorry.
Yeah, I'd agree with Angus. I think we use the business status to tie up the application with other downstream applications that we have running. So those are legacy systems. They have a particular state machine, so to speak, associated with them, and we just need to tie the two things up together.
So it's worth noting, because status is mandatory, a business status is always aligned with a status. So it's not like you can use a business status as an alternative to status. And the status reason could, if you had no business status, certainly describe the reason why you are in a particular status or move to a particular status, but equally it might be describing the implication of a combination of the status and the business status. So in that case, it's a parallel. They're actually parallel and interconnected. So the example in the spec is, as Andy said, it's about I'm in progress, and here is further detail. And the business status provides you the ability to provide that further detail of status. So you see in one of the most useful ones in a radiology requesting fulfillment would be around booking. So there is no way of capturing booking in status, but we could do that in business status by saying it's booked, and now they've arrived for scanning.
So can I just ask then, Andy, so you can have your status reason, so say we've got some progress or actually going on hold. We could then have multiple business statuses that essentially can be mapped on hold there. So we could have the request for more information, or we're awaiting a sample or awaiting the specialist report.
Yeah, so the question for us is going to be, given the only thing we can do with status is constrain which one we want to use. That with business status and the status reason, we now have an opportunity to, in theory, overlay a value set if we wanted to at some point. We could leave it, open, obviously, because it's codable content and you put text in there. But there will be at some point probably a need or opportunity to formalize those details. We obviously also want to ensure that you don't randomly pick from the business statuses and apply them to a random status. So,
there is a binding implicitly.
There isn't a binding. You need to overlay that with a constraint to say, which is what I tend to do, which is say if you're in a cancelled state, then your business status must be one of this or that. Yeah. Or if your business status is this, then your status needs to be cancelled.
I have to look at them. I don't know if I'm right. It's like the status of business status getting more and more granular. You've got status, and then business status is getting more granular, and then status reason is getting even more granular, like telling you in a sentence maybe why. And I wonder whether, there's this open question whether we define business status. Like, is it our role to define a whole lot of business status of pathology and radiology? And then it's a codable concept, and it's only 0 to 1. Yeah, only have one. I wonder whether you could have multiple, be even more granular in the business status. Like, so we could define a set of 6 business status of pathology, but then allow people to put even just ad hoc ones in as well.
Yeah, so that's what the reason would be for the ad hoc. Marvin?
With business status, I don't know that I can see necessarily a case for that for interoperability. Maybe that's something that will come further down the line. But I see that as something that you can use with a task as in your business scenario, in your scenario, as opposed to something that you necessarily have to exchange. So I wouldn't be thinking that it would be a must support, and a 0 to 1 is fine.
Do you not think it'd be nice that we could come to a set of pathology, radiology, business statuses so that GP systems have a consistent message?
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
Because otherwise you're going to get selected, samples acquired, legal. There's going to be like all these different things that actually mean the same thing.
It's pretty consistent thinking around things like radiology staging. So,
Radiology is part of the pathology. I think pathology is pretty easy.
well, I would say from a collections ordering perspective, being able to recognize book is pretty important for radiology especially.
I think it's
the other one is, I think there is, given we have directed and the thing that is not directed, that I think being able to differentiate claim request is a useful thing, because if you're a filler, to know that the fulfillment has been cancelled. And to know that it was cancelled because it's actually being fulfilled by someone else. And without that, you've got a relationship potentially to the patient from previous things. And there may be other kind of ways you interact with the patient. If you, for instance, know that an order has not been fulfilled, has been cancelled, then there may be additional value you can provide of something. I think there will be cases where there are specific business statuses we probably want to recommend.
I think you got to look at it from the requested side. Like you could probably go down the rabbit hole of radiology with like transcribed and typed, but the requested really care. Like as a patient went to radiology, is that you're working on the report and says it's finished, but some of those minutiae in the middle, which is all part of radiology workflow. I'm not denying that this was a task to run your radiology workflow to have all those things, but you remember this is service to the requester and what he needs to know about. I don't need to know that my Amazon package is on this conveyor belt and that conveyor belt and then this truck. I just want to know is it in my suburb coming.
But does a placer need to know anything about the business status?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the value propositions for eRequesting from a place's perspective as a clinician, knowing that when you get to that in progress one, it could be weeks long, potentially. And
Yeah, but
it's actually what's happening during that. As I say, I think the book and scanning one is absolute business value.
But if I mean, it's only going to be really. I mean, I guess it could be valuable as just some text, but there will be a lot of statuses that they probably wouldn't understand depending on how you use it, and the specifications I'm going to put down for it. I think it might be hard to come up with a list.
I think if you want to get that granular, it's hard, but if you stay high as to what the doctor wants to see, it's quite simple.
I think like we're not going to be able to pull that together today here, but I think there's potentially an action item for us to revisit that in the TDG and determine if we can come up with a value set for the business status, so that at the moment we can make it unconstrained, but it's discussion and an action item for the TDG to revisit in the future and see if there is value in creating a value set. It might be, maybe it's an extensible value set, right? So here's some codes that you should use, but you've got others you can add to it, right? We can have that conversation. I think what we're saying here is there is value there, and we should do this.
Definitely, we will be using it, but in terms of constraining that, listen, I'm open to discussion on it.
So Daniel here, I think we're talking about replacing a number of different things into this particular case. And I think if we're looking at it purely from the place's point of view, then we negate usefulness from the filler point of view. And I think also just from my experience, workflows are very different across different modalities. And it's important for those workflows to be able to be tracked, should there be a design to do so. And not all of that will replace it relevant, but some of it will. And given that we've just got one notable concept field to use here, I think we ought to be really cautious about tying it down to a list.
I think playing this between
let me just finish. Just knowing modalities and the differences that take place, it's going to be a huge job to try and come up with a set of values here.
I'd agree with that.
This is not a task defining the workflow that happens in lab for radiology. It's a task defining the workflow of a doctor ordering something. He doesn't care that when you go into the macro cut up and micro veg with the microphone. He doesn't care. We're not defining those statuses, right? that's another task for your lab to create for yourself to do whatever you're doing. This is a window for the doctor to say, we're doing your stuff. And what do you want to know? I want to know if the patient's been collected maybe, I want to know it's in the lab, and I want to know it's complete or it's pending. I don't care how you did your work in your lab. I don't care, whether the sample's in the heater or the fridge. That's not what this task's about. To me, it's a couple of very simple status. And from the doctor's point of view, you don't care much except for the patient come and do that. Are you now doing it? Great. Have you finished it? You finished it. Because he cares about the patient who gave him a patient, and then that patient never went. Now he's going to ring him up and go, why didn't you get the pathology done? He doesn't care about all the steps that happen in the middle. Even at Sonic, like, we struggle to get collection status. Like, we wanted to say, receive, collected, in lab, complete, right? We struggled to get the collection status. Then we thought, what does it bloody well matter? Like, the doctor just wants to know, have you got it? Is it in the lab? Like, he doesn't even care about whether you collected it and then 10 minutes later it was in the lab or an hour later. He wants to know the patient rolled up and it's happening. And so I see these statuses right up at that level. And by us finding, we're not constraining what a lab does. That's another task for another day. We're never going to be able to find a task for how a lab does histology. Not in this decade. That's a different scope, a different task.
Let's also say that while we're concentrating on placer and the transparency of the placer, there's also the patient, obviously. And we know with you're doing tracking, you don't have anything else to do in your life. You want to see, where is my thing up to? I think from getting a patient involved and being active in what's going on, we should also not discount that you only need this information because that's all we want. I agree with Angus, there's a balance here. And it's just figuring out what that balance is. And I don't think we're going to define it today. Probably the one thing that is probably worthwhile thinking about, though, is whether business status is something that is possible. That, at least at a very basic level, there is a value that must provide, business status provide.
Well, on that, why don't we just go through and look at them both. So this is the status reason. So this is the reason why it's at one of those states in the state machine. And the proposal here is that it must support. It's optional, 0 to 1. And it's just an unconstrained codable concept. So you can put text in there if you want to explain why it's been held, failed, used. I don't know if used in it, and the like. So I don't think we didn't spend really any time discussing this because I think it was pretty much given, but I'd like to make that proposal. Given that, second it.
I'll tell you.
Second.
Oh, I'm not sharing.
Right.
Should be the now. So we'll be paying.
So this is for status reason as opposed to business status. It must support 0 to 1 codable concept, which does allow free text, I believe. So yeah. All right, that seems pretty stable. So we'll call it at 29 in the affirmative, 0 negative, and 6 abstaining for status reason. While we're here, does anybody want to make the proposal for business status?
I've got one. So I think with business status, I think my take on the room was that it is important. There was debate over whether we would find a value set for it or not. But I didn't hear anyone saying that they didn't think it was useful. So for me, that would say it is must support. Cardinality 0 to 1, so it's optional. I think potentially because we wouldn't be able to come up with that value set today in this room. So we've got the option here of saying it's currently unconstrained codable concept, and we can come back to it. We can have an action item in a minute that the TDG will revisit this, or we can decide that we don't want to vote on this at this time until we have made that decision. But I would, like moving forward, that propose that we do propose it as is stated here, that it's unconstrained codable concept, because we can always come back to it later instead of trying it again.
Is there a second for that?
Can I just respond to you? I just think I struggle a bit with making something must support when you seem to quite divergent opinions as to how it should be viewed. Because must support is you provide the information necessary. But if I think it should be just set vote and you think you have to vote, it's your name.
Yeah. So I think the position you've got is that we shouldn't vote on this now,
So I would push for it.
that we would push it out until we've had the discussion further.
I'm speaking to that opinion, but other people.
I'm similar, like without knowing the step, after knowing
Would you like to vote on whether or not to vote for it?
How do we do that? We vote on whether to vote. It's a vote, yeah. But I don't know whether there's a consensus on not voting. So maybe we should vote.
We're going to get a consensus,
I
right?
think we can have the vote. If you would like this to be discussed later and we want to have that value set discussion, vote negative, right? So that means we can come back to it.
I think we should vote for whether to vote.
Yeah. Okay.
It's more about deferring. I think that's what we're voting for, is to defer.
That's the
Affirmative proposal.
Yes.
We defer this.
So we will vote then on whether or not this goes ahead to vote. Voting in the affirmative, we'll defer this until later. Voting in the negative, we will action it now. Is that clear enough?
Clarify that further, that
Please.
we defer until we have identified a value set.
Sure.
Yeah. So just to clarify, so affirmative is deferring.
We are deferring if you vote affirmative.
And negative means we want to vote.
Correct. Abstaining means you're abstaining.
Yes.
I hope that helps.
Probably important everyone to vote.
Yeah,
I agree.
we're happy to keep that handy.
To give this a little bit longer for the people online as well. Wrap their heads around what we're saying.
Hopefully, I've voted affirmative, which means we're going to defer it.
Correct, Marvin, yes.
Fantastic.
Okay, that seems pretty stable. So we'll say this will be deferred until the TDG presents a draft value set on the status, a business status.
So on that, do we have someone who wants to progress the drafting of the concept that would be in that value set?
Andy?
Andy.
We need a imaging.
Yeah, I mean, we can have a group of people who would like to work. Is there anyone who'd like to work with Andy on that? Michael Osborne? Anyone else? Yeah. Anyone online?
I'm gonna volunteer one of my guys to work on it with you.
Marvin has voluntold someone.
Yeah.
So for anyone online that didn't catch that, there are a group of people that are going to work on that draft value set. We'll defer this until that time and we'll come back to this at a later date.
I think that was a really good example of showing this process works. Right. That we didn't get consensus on a proposal. We'll go and work on it and bring it back.
Or negative people who disagree.
Yeah. Okay. Next one's task owner.
We've got 15 minutes until the next break.
Right.
So if we're voting on whether or not to vote, on whether we vote, we'll have a chat about owner. We'll see how we go, and we'll keep an eye on it. Easy.
So the individual, organisation or device currently responsible for task execution. Down in the comments here, in the requirement identifies who's expected to perform this task, and the comment has tasks may be created without an owner not yet identified. So to me, this reads as for a directed task, there would be an owner assigned. For an undirected, there would be no owner assigned, until which point it is claimed. So there's this, the spec says it can be a practitioner role, organisation, care team, health service, patient, device, or related person. So there's probably some discussion around this about what it is. The one thought is that it's an organisation. Be interested to hear if anyone thinks it might be something other than an organisation that would be owner of the task.
Do any of the labs have the provision for someone? Actually, this is the task owner, isn't it? No, I withdraw that.
If you're doing on the spot testing, then it may be a particular or you're going to role rather than black. Who are you referring to? Practitioner in real practice. You go for specific still up you get like the level or there are can be a rebate for it. So so they're separate to your organisation, but an individual, and that individual doesn't have an organisation. So for normal like biology, so there's also a service of your performer, right? Which is another way. I think the practitioner role might be the same. I view that whether you're a doctor requesting test and you want to send it to a named individual or in your case, like in the other room, that is part of your service request, almost immutable. That's your commandment, right? Which is somewhat independent of the task that will actually happen. And I wondered, as similar to what you're saying, there's this thing in the Medicare schedule about a named provider, right? Where you could say, I want radiologist Bob Smith to do this. Not anybody's provision's been taken out, but yes. Yeah, and you know, and then if it's named like that, then Medicare will not pay for it if you go see Johnson down the road, right? You've got to go to that named provider. But that doesn't mean you must, like as a patient, you will, right? You can go, well, I won't want to do that named provider. I'm going to go to this other place. And I realise I'm going to have to pay privately because Medicare is not going to pay for it. And so I wondered whether that's where service request form works quite well. So you'd say the immutable request from the doctor is you've got to go to this guy and get this done. Now, then the task might be initially to that guy, because that's what the doctor wants him to do. But then you go somewhere else, you go to this other place, and they scan this. Now, it'd be nice for that to come and say, well, actually, your doctor really wanted you to go to this guy, right? We advise you go to this guy. And you go, no, I hate him. I'm going to pay for it privately. You know, you're going to have to pay privately.
I want you to do it. And so the task now gets sort of redirected to where you are, where you're demanding you might have it done. Yet the service request remain with the data on it that says, doctor actually wanted to go here. And then that's kind of your evidence to Medicare. You know, Medicare, you try and claim Medicare, we aren't paying for this. You go look at the service request because you name this provider, you didn't go there, right? So you've got the whole audit trail of where you're meant to go and the reality of where you actually went. So I just articulating that I think there is a performer on the service request and there's a half donor. And I see that one is what was desired to happen, one is what actually.
I mean, I like your thinking because I think it's part of the specification of the request. It was what you intended. The question I have, and Vince, you may know the answer to this, is it's never clear. It's not clear to me that what is supposed to happen versus what does happen. I've heard of people with, for instance, I'm talking more general referrals to an individual clinician who have gone to another clinician, MBS, no problem at all. I've heard of ones which have been a no to whom it may concern, and you can in theory claim anywhere. I've got this organisations, aim at an organisation only, but then I don't think it's as black and white as you can only select someone from this organisation.
I mean, for a general referral, yes, Medicare used to be very specific. It had to be somebody who is provider. Now they don't care. As long as it's someone in the same organisation, they're happy, even if it's an organisation that does something similar, they don't care. They still want to provide a number, but it has to be a provider number. But for things like testing that's done in practice, they do that with specific provider number on a food form, because that has ramifications in terms of how much feedback you get.
What about, obviously there's not a lot of directed to a specific pathology, but I've certainly heard for radiology, it's more common that a clinician goes, I prefer this radiology service or this radiologist to do it. What's the implication for that?
It can happen, especially if things like intervention, radiology, you have specific research. But I don't think it has any. It's just the effectiveness of patient treatment.
So, in the interest of time, what I'm hearing is that there are some use cases in our service as this expands into beyond diagnostics, that there is a need to have a owner that is a practitioner role. So I would like to propose, and if not move, that we accept this with the amendment of including practitioner role.
Well, or is Angus's approach more clear? Because I like that idea of separation that Angus has proposed, that the actual service request, when it was created, was actually assigned to, and so you can't arbitrarily pick a filler potentially or have it filled by someone else without understanding and carrying that in the original intent with fulfillment. Even though it may be completely, it's not up to us or the filler to be judge, jury, and executioner on interpreting policy. But I think at least by being able to carry the complete information. The problem is what are we going to do? What are we going to say about service request performance?
Well, independent of that, the task at hand, sorry about that. If the service request does have a performer of practitioner role, we would want to carry that through, whether it's the same practitioner role or a reassigned practitioner role. If I'm hearing the use case appropriately, and potentially in imaging as well, there is a need to actually have a provider number, and rather than perhaps discounting the possibility. We've always got ballot to negative.
Daniel,
I was
just going to say that whilst the use case is there, there is a use case that provides for direct sending it to a specific provider, ultimately the patient can still go to anyone. So the example in radiology is the most common one, where I might direct the patient to go to a specific radiologist because they specialize in a particular muscle, but they can still ultimately go anywhere. So I guess you can assign an owner, but it's not necessarily going to be the person who executes it. So is it really that relevant to have it as the task owner? Or should it be a separate field? Or should it even be, like, that's the question, I guess, is it's not necessarily relevant if they go somewhere else.
I'd like to think any practitioner role as an owner, right? Like if you need a practitioner at a place, creates a practitioner role. So the task owner can be an organisation, but the service performer can point to a practitioner role. Like if, I don't know if the task performer needing to be an organisation, like if
But practically in a system, you're not going to select one and another.
you are.
We're going to just select who is the directed.
No, because the doctor's going to say, you must go to Dr. Smith. And so the task of the Dr. Smith's organisation and the performer is Dr. Smith. But then the patient goes elsewhere, right? The task has to be redirected. So that task owner has to change, right? And it's shown the role with somewhere else. The original request was what?
Task owner never changes. You create
Well,
new
you
stuff.
can't be asking another one.
Yes.
Practitioner role doesn't necessarily have an organisation. It can derive it if that's what you're looking.
We could if we profile it for eRequesting.
They're saying you don't have to have an organisation on a practitioner role, it's optional. If you're assuming that you're going to derive the organisation and task from the former of the service request that at the present,
But more
not
than
necessarily
a scenario like my organisation, a clinic, and the former is the doctor in 2 rooms down.
again, it's really what, as a collective, we need to work out what we're going to go to ballot with and keeping in mind this up as a public comment. So what are we?
I don't mind that much. As an organisation, my comment, I'm only going to look at tasks that have got organisation on it. You want to create tasks for a practitioner or person or whatever, I'm just getting more. No, that's fine.
And again, so the way that we've sort of scoped this around service requests is we're not stopping people from putting in a practitioner role. You're just not compliant with this profile. You can still go and do it. You can still, you're just not a eRequesting compliant.
Yeah, who's the
Trying to get a core to core again of eRequesting. The core of eRequest. You don't want to make it so simple.
That's true. Where's the organisation ready to develop picking up tasks with our organisation? Like who's the practitioner do that? Like who's championing that? Championing, I'm going to do that.
We already have, so here is picking up organizations subtype that we've talked about before. So an organization derived from another organization, picking up a request that is sent or signed to a practitioner role belonging to an organization. I don't know if that's an extreme thing. I don't mind. As he described it, it seems reasonable, I think. At this point, to say, well, we're allowed for a practitioner role or organisation, and then when we take that to ballot, like,
Again, from an obligation perspective, the places, the fillers are going to be the ones that are going to have to have.
I mean, where's the bill system that's consuming it? Like, who's got the hand? Who they are? Are they here?
Hannah,
I'm doing.
Someone ready to make a proposal, even if that includes an amendment?
It would be the APP, the provider, the policy to be in charge of that organisation.
Well, see, the problem, the Sonic, do I now have to look at all my pathologists practitioner roles on in case someone is directed at one of my pathologists? Now I am responsible. Like, is that what you're asking?
well, you'd have to look for. You say, well, I'm not going to pick up anything unless that practitioner role is actually of our organisation. So you look for the organisation of
So I've
that.
got to look for tasks where owner is organisation for me and tasks which are practitioner role that have an organisation.
So depending on our obligations that we talk about later, if we get there, You can reject because someone has provided you with a practitioner role, right? So you as
You never see it.
a filler have accepted the message, determined that someone has provided a practitioner role as the.
But Andy's right. I would never see it because I'm not looking for it. And you can say, oh, you can reject it. Go, well, I'm not even looking for them to reject them, right? So someone places them, but Dr. Ken Sakara.
As long as you haven't failed, all right?
I'm definitely not going to fail. In fact, you're not going to do anything.
Consider unservice because unless you're now proposing I have to collect up all my pathologists.
No, that's not what I'm saying. No, I'm saying you're allowed, as long as you don't error and fall over and die, and are able to basically say, no, I reject or I accept. That's all you have to do as an obligation.
As a champion, I think we need someone from radiology. Because this is knowledgeable to the public. So I imagine that the radiology provider maybe would have more buy-in into this.
And again, this is where I'd like the person to be the service request performer and the task to be owned by the whole company they work for. Company that's going to get more.
Danielle?
I couldn't hear. Sorry, I'm going to put my hand back down. It's really hard to hear at the moment.
I'll make an amendment to my amended motion and go with I'll move that we go with what's on the screen.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. So the current proposal then is what was written, which is must support with the cardinality of 0 to 1, and it must reference the AU core organization.
Would you read the proposal again, please? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So the current proposal is for task.owner. It will be must support with a cardinality of 0 to 1, and the type will be a reference to an AU core organization.
Thank you.
My vote's not in now.
So we'll close it there. We look pretty consistent. So 18 in the affirmative, 3 negative, and 15 abstaining. Plus 1 on the affirmative makes that 19. Right after saying I heard what you said. All right, so it's time for a little bit of a break. We'll come back for 3:15. Looks like we will need that last session, I'd say. Yeah, so it says 2:45 to 3:15. So we'll finish off the last couple of proposals that we have when we come back, and then Pete has some stuff to go through as well.
So we've still got the end of wave 1 and 2. We've got wave 3, which is search, and then if we get time, we'll go into wave 4 obligations. Or maybe we'll just do, if we get to it, an introduction about what wave 4 is going to be about, so we can start thinking about it before next opportunity.
Do we need a half-hour break?
Or go shorter.
Yeah.
So we'll be back at what, 3:05? 15 minutes? Okay.
2 minutes past 3.
2 minutes past 3, 2 minutes 30.
15.
Okay. What is second? All right, 3:05.